So I was thinking about what to do for tonight because it's just a one night thing, and that doesn't sound good. And so you know what I mean. And so Joe will be back. He's going to start something next week. So I was thinking about what I could do tonight that would, just to be honest with you, 100,000% transparent, that wouldn't be too much work. Yes. But that could be impactful. And so what I came across was I was reading a book this week for my class, and it's called Every Square Inch, An Introduction to Cultural Engagement for Christians by Bruce Riley Ashford. The book was written in 2015, so not too terribly long ago. And it's all about how Christians are to engage with the secular culture around them, how we do that effectively, I would say, and how we are often ineffective in that. And so as I was thinking about what I would like to do for this evening, the book came to mind because we only have the 1 week here. And so we can't go through the entire book. So as I was perusing the book, the first chapter kind of just came to my attention. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to read through, but I'll do it in a form that's not just as boring as reading through a chapter of a book, and I'll do it more in the form of preaching, but I do want to make it clear, and I'm going to say this a couple times throughout as I do it, because this is going to be online, that this is not me. Okay, so this is Bruce Riley Ashford and his book. So I just and I'll make that notation on YouTube, because I don't want to get in trouble. So this is his book, his words. I just want to present it in a way that's just not boring me sitting down and reading. And so I figured the way I can do that is, that should be a little less boring. How's that? Right? And right. Because my preaching's not boring, so there's that, And so, and of course, no church service would be complete without Scripture. He references some Scripture, but we don't read any through the chapter. So I found a passage that is very relevant to what we're talking about tonight, and it's 1 Corinthians 9:12-13, and you can follow behind me. It says, this is Paul speaking to the church in Corinth, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I may win more. To the Jews I became a Jew, so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win some who are under the law. To those who are without the law, as without the law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it." That is pretty much what this book is about, cultural engagement. How do we engage with the outside world and with the secular world? So I'm just going to begin reading in chapter 1. I printed off, I killed a few trees to do this, so appreciate it. There we go. Here you go, Barb. Joel, could you hand that back to Barb? Thank you, brother. Yeah. And but I wanted you to be able to follow along with me, so that way I'm not just speaking at you, okay? So you can follow along. So this is chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 1, competing views on theology and culture. And again, it sounds boring, but as I get into it, you'll see it's not super academic-y and all that. This is from Bruce. "My second week in the former Soviet Union, I was introduced to the banya. My buddies told me that it will be a lot like an American sauna. And sure enough, it was square room with a lot of heat. But there were a few differences. One difference lay in the fact that steam was generated by pouring vodka onto a barrel full of hot coals. I wanted to join in, but as a Baptist, I didn't have any vodka and couldn't find my bottle of NyQuil. Another difference lay in the fact that many of these saunas have bundles of birch branches in the corner with which men whip one another on the back, starting at the heels and working methodically and consistently up to the shoulders. Afterward, they go outside the banya and roll around in the snow. I'm not kidding. I've never prayed so hard for the second coming. Aside from a few odd moments, such as the one I just described, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of being immersed in a very complex culture, one that was multi-layered synthesis of Soviet-era atheism, Central Island Islam, capitalism, and postmodernism. On Friday evenings, I could pay $1 to attend world-class symphonies, piano concerts at the Performing Arts Center 1 mile from my apartment. On weekday mornings, I took language lessons in Russian and Tatar, discovering how human languages provided unique categories for thinking and unique advantages and disadvantages for meditating on the gospel. On weekday afternoons, I taught at 3 universities that were cultural legacies of years past. In the evenings, I drank hot tea, the manly drink of choice in Central Asia, best imbibed with a spot of milk and a spoon of sugar, and watched snow fall on a mosque and an Eastern Orthodox cathedral that stood just outside of my apartment window. Often, I had a huddle of undergrad or grad students in my apartment asking me questions about why I believe in God. They were atheists. Or how in the world could I believe that a man was God? Those were Muslims. As an evangelical Protestant living in part of Russia, populated mostly by Central Asian Muslims, I was forced to live in a cultural context that was different in many ways from the one which I had grown up. There were some aspects of this culture that I preferred to my home context, and some that I did not. There were things that I embraced easily and things I did not. The question that kept surfacing, however, was how should I, as an evangelical Christian, approach culture? In other words, is culture something good or bad? On the one hand, is it something I should try to escape or avoid, or against which I should fight? On the other hand, is it something I should embrace, or is there a third or better alternative? When it comes to interacting with culture, Christians face a choice between several options. One option is to live a life that can be characterized as Christianity against culture, which views culture as something that a person tries to escape from or fight against. Another option would be called Christianity of culture, which views culture uncritically as something that can be accepted wholesale into a person's life in church. A final option can be called Christianity in and for culture, in which a believer seeks to live Christianity within his or her cultural context and for the betterment of that context while not rejecting it wholesale. On the other hand, or accepting it wholesale. The remainder of this chapter, and in fact the whole book, will attempt to articulate what it might look like for an American Christian to live out their faith in the midst of their particular cultural context. So what is culture? Before going any further, however, we should take a moment to discuss what we mean when we talk about culture. When some people talk about culture, what they really mean is high culture, because they have in mind a sophisticated cultural product such as Beethoven's music or Rembrandt's paintings. When other people talk about culture, what they really mean is popular culture, because they have in mind everyday cultural products like television shows, movies, top 40 songs. And still others use the word culture to refer to anything that is against what they believe as a Christian. Unlike these three senses of the word culture, the meaning I have in mind is an all-encompassing culture. It's anything that humans produce when they interact with each other and with God's creation. When we interact with each other and with God's creation, we cultivate the ground, like grain, vegetables, and livestock. We produce artifacts like clothes, housing, and cars. We build institutions like governments, businesses, and schools. We form worldviews like theism, pantheism, and atheism. And we participate in religion, Christianity, Hinduism, all of those there, atheism, Islam. We produce culture. And at the same time, our cultural context, meaning what surrounds us, is what shapes us. There we go. Affecting who we are, what we think and do, and how we feel. So the concept of culture is very broad and encompasses in one way or another the totality of our life in this world. For this reason, we don't want to get it wrong in figuring out a Christian's relationship to culture. If we get the relationship right, it will positively transform our lives and the world around us. But if we get it wrong, it will deform our lives and the world around us. So now that we have a basic grasp of what culture is, we are prepared to outline 3 models for relating Christianity and culture. And as I'm describing these models, you will probably be able to place yourself and other Christians you know in one of these categories. And again, I want to make it clear, these are not my words. This is not my book. This is an intro into cultural engagement. Christianity against culture. Some proponents of Christianity against culture tend to view the church primarily as a bomb shelter. This is especially a temptation for Americans who realize that their country is becoming increasingly post-Christian and in some ways even anti-Christian. They realize that their beliefs on certain theological and moral issues will increasingly be rejected and mocked by the political culture elite and by many of their fellow citizens. Under such an ideological assault, Christians sometimes have a collective anxiety attack. Their dominant mood tends to be protective, conceiving the church as a bomb shelter, trying to protect believers from aerial assault, or perhaps a monastery where people can withdraw from the contingencies of contemporary existence. Or even better, a perpetual yoga retreat where we can empty our minds of certain harsh realities. Believers with this mentality have good intentions. They want to preserve the church's purity, recognizing that the church is under attack and that therefore we should hold fast to the faith, like it says in Revelation 3:11. They know that there is a great battle being waged, like it says in Ephesians chapter 6. A battle that plays out both invisibly in the heavenly realm and visibly in the culture realm. However, this mentality is misguided, arising from a timid fear of humanity. It is spurred more by secular wisdom than by biblical faith, more by faithless fear than by Christian courage and vitality. It views the church as a walled city rather than a living being, as a safe deposit box rather than a conduit of spiritual power. It externalizes godlessness and treats it as something that can be kept out by man-made walls, rather than understanding that godlessness is a disease of the soul that can never be walled out. This mindset tends towards legalism and tries to restrict Christians' interactions with society and culture. While it rightly recognizes that the Christian life involves war against the powers of darkness, it wrongly tries to wage that war by escaping from the world. This obeys only one half of Jesus' admonition to be in the world, but not of the world, according to John 17. Other proponents of Christianity against culture view the church primarily as an ultimate fighter. The ultimate fighter mentality shares much in common with the bomb shelter mentality, but it deals with its anxiety in a different manner. It tends to see Christians exclusively and comprehensively as fighters, whose weapons are beliefs, feelings, and values wielded in spiritual warfare. Unlike those hiding in the bomb shelter, the fighters venture forth into the surrounding culture, seeking greater awareness of it so that they might assault it with lethal force. Believers with this mentality are clinging to the biblical principle of waging war against what is evil. They rightly recognize that we must put on the whole armor of God, according to Ephesians 6:11, that we must fight the good faith, 1 Timothy 6:12, resist the devil, according to James 4:7, and cast down anything that exalts itself against God, 2 Corinthians. However, this mentality is misguided to the extent that it wrongly applies the principles above. The fault of the Ultimate Fighter Church, or UFC, that's pretty good, is not that it wants to fight, but that it suggests that the entirety of the Christian life is nothing but war. Our social and cultural contexts are full of unbelievers, but those unbelievers are not only enemies of God, but they are also drowning people in need of a lifeboat. The church is not only a base for soldiers, but also a hospital for the sick. The Christian life is surely a battle, but it is no less a journey, a joy, an adventure, and a trust. In other words, Christians must indeed fight, but that is not the only thing they do. Their battling is done from within the broader context of the entire Christian life. Christianity of culture. Those with a Christianity of culture perspective tend to build churches that are mirrors of the culture. Christians within this mindset tend to view their cultural context in very high esteem, perhaps disagreeing with aspects of it here or there, but for the most part, finding it to be an ally rather than a threat. They tend to interact easily and uncritically with the dominant philosophical, political, and cultural trends of the day. Unlike those who seek to escape from the culture or fight with it with lethal force, they seek to incorporate the dominant culture seamlessly into their lives and churches. Believers with this mentality rightly recognize that God ordered the world in such a way that humans would make culture, and that they rightly recognize that their culture exhibits real aspects of truth, goodness, and beauty. However, this mentality is misguided because it fails to sufficiently see the way in which every culture and every aspect of culture is corrupted and distorted because of human sin. When Christians adopt a Christianity of culture mindset, they take away Christianity's abilities to be a prophetic voice, and usually end up sacrificing doctrines and moral beliefs that run contrary to the cultural consensus. This mindset comes at too high of a cost, as it ends up subverting the historical Christian faith. Christianity in and for culture. And again, I want to say for online that this is not my words. This is an intro into cultural engagement. We live in and for our cultural context. A third and better mindset is one that views human beings as representatives of Christ who live their lives in the midst of and for the good of their cultural context, and whose cultural lives are characterized by obedience and witness. Every culture possesses some inherent goodness. God ordered the world in such a way that people spontaneously make culture. And the very existence of art, food, housing, education represents a fundamental human good. Furthermore, God has enabled all people, Christian or not, to make good and valuable contributions in the cultural realm. But under this view, the Christian also recognizes that every culture is corrupted and misdirected. Since the time of the very first couple's sin, All human beings sin, and our own sin corrupts our cultural efforts. We are idolaters, people who worship things that ought not to be worshiped, such as sex, money, and power. And the cultural realities we produce tend to be directed towards those idols rather than towards Christ. So God structured the world so that it would be a cultural world, but we humans have misdirected our cultural realities. Every cultural context is structurally good, but directionally corrupt. For this reason, we must live firmly in the midst of our culture context structurally, all the while seeking to steer our culture realities toward Christ rather than toward idols. In order to help us think clearly about the cultural aspect of our mission, let me explain more precisely what I mean by structure and direction. When God created the world, it was good. It was a good world, both structurally and directionally. The way God designed the world, its structures, was good, and the way humanity used his world was good. It honored God and was directed toward him. After the fall, the world remained structurally good, became directionally bad. The world is still good in its design, but human beings use the world in a way that are oriented towards self-worship and the worshiping of things rather than God. We live in a fallen world. Our tendency as humans is to worship things. Didn't I already read this? Okay, like sex, money, power, rather than worshiping God. And when we worship idols like this, it affects our social and cultural activities. Our activities are misdirected, being aimed towards idols rather than God. I did read this. Okay, anyway, as Christians, we want to speak out against this misdirection of God's world. But in speaking out against the world, we are doing the best possible thing for the world. We're being against the world for the sake of the world. Because of Christ's redemption, you and I, are new creatures. God has transformed us so that we live in an entirely different manner than we did before. That transformation affects all of the things we do, including our cultural activities. For this reason, our mission as Christians includes identifying the ways in which our culture are corrupted and misdirected by sin, and then doing everything in our power to help bring healing and redirection to them. When we do this, we are obeying Christ and being a witness. We do this as a matter of obedience. If Christ is the creator of everything, then we must realize that his lordship is as wide as creation. Nothing in this universe escapes his lordship. And if his lordship is as wide as creation, then our obedience to his lordship must be as wide as culture. The call to be disciples of Christ is the call to bring absolutely every square inch of the fabric of our lives under his lordship. We do this also as a matter of witness. Every aspect of human life and culture is ripe for Christian witness. Every dimension of culture, whether it's art, science, or politics, is an arena in which we can speak about Christ with our lips and reflect him with our lives. We thank God for the existence of culture and recognize whatever is good in it, while at the same time seeking to redirect whatever is not good towards Christ. We realize that we will never win by transforming our culture in such a way that it glorifies Christ comprehensively or enduringly. God never promises victory until Christ returns and secures the victory for himself. But he does command us to obey him and bear witness to him by doing everything within our power to direct our cultural activities towards Christ. Almost done. A preview of the kingdom. When Christ returns, he will return as the victorious king. Until that time, the Christian community should live its life as a seamless tapestry of word and deed. When we witness and obey in this manner, we benefit the world by serving as a preview of God's coming kingdom. We proclaim Christ and the gospel with our lips, and we promote Christ and the gospel with our lives. In doing so, we offer to the world a preview of that future era when Christ rules the new heavens and the new earth, the area in which all social and cultural realities will be directed toward Christ. In that era, we will have right relationship with God, each other, the created order, and our social and cultural activities will be perfect and resplendent reflections of Christ. Absolutely everything in life matters to God. He cares not only about the goings-on within the four walls of a congregational gathering, but also about the goings-on in the corner of society and culture. We must live Christianity not only as the church gathered on Sunday morning for worship, but also as the church scattered into the world in our work, leisure, and community life. We must take seriously our interactions in the arts, the sciences, the public square, the academy. When we as a church live our lives in such a way that everything we do and say points to God, our combined witness serves as an attractive preview of God's coming kingdom. In that kingdom, there will be no more pain, no tears, no more sin or the consequences of sin. In that kingdom, we will be in right relationship with God, each other, and all of creation. And there's no greater calling in life than to live as a preview of that kingdom. While I was living abroad in Russia, it would have been easy to fall in love with my new culture. Admittedly, part of the draw of living overseas is the opportunity to experience new cultural realities. But it would have been equally tempting, particularly during seasons of loneliness and isolation, or when encountering some aspect of that culture that was hostile to my Christian faith, to despise the culture as a whole. My goal, and I hope you share the same goal, was neither to idolize nor despise the culture. I was on a mission to serve, and my goal was to reflect the transformative power of God in and for the culture to the glory of God. So that ends his, and then we'll end by just talking about a couple of questions that we have. Hey, Andy, could you go ahead and shut off the video? Thanks, bud.